Hi, I'm Hermes and welcome to my weekly bird wrap, where this week I'm going to talk about birds that eat truffles, whiteback swallows, a fabulous trip that I just did to Western New South Wales with a group of bird watchers, and the problem we have with birds falling out of nests and what to do about them and whether to put them back. Hi, I'm Hermes and welcome to my weekly bird wrap, where I bring you interesting stories from all around the world. And the first story I'd like to bring you today is about birds that eat truffles. Now, we all know that truffles are a very expensive food that are eaten by people around the world, and that there are fungus that are dug up from under the ground next to the host tree. And we often use dogs to find the fungi because they actually have a particular smell. Now, truffles are a group of fungus of which there are many hundreds of species. And not all of them are the sort of culinary delights that humans like. And some mammals eat truffles from under the ground, but we've recently discovered that in South America, there's a group of birds that like eating truffles. Now, they're a strange group of South American birds. One of the species is called the wet-wet, which is spelt H-U-E-T, H-U-E-T. It's a Spanish word. And they're part of a group of birds that are largely, that have weak flight. They're largely ground dwelling. They look a bit like a blackbird, if you like, but they're a group of birds that scientists have now discovered that they eat truffles, or at least they eat the fungi that grow under the ground around certain trees. Now, the fungi work in cooperation with the tree to give the tree various nutrients, and of course the tree supports the fungi which is growing on the roots. Now we find out that the birds come along and eat the truffles, and then they spread in their droppings the fungi around the forest. So in fact you have the bird, the fungus and the tree all dependent on one another to maintain their life cycles. So fascinatingly, we have birds that like truffles. I think that's a great story out of South America this week. The second story I'd like to bring you this week is about a trip I've just done with a group of bird watchers through central New South Wales. Now, New South Wales is absolutely under flood at the moment. There's been water and rain and flooding everywhere. Over the 5 days, it rained every day. We had heavy wind. It was a pretty difficult time to spend out in Western New South Wales, in Narrandera, Griffith, West Wyalong, and up to Lake Jellicoe. But fabulously, we actually did see 150 odd species of birds. We had a fantastic time on that trip, and one of the places we visited, which was fantastic, was the Kokopara National Park, just north of Griffith. This is a wonderful ridge that runs north-south, covered in calitris pine and various species of wattles, and we saw some fabulous birds there. And I'm hoping to take some bird watching groups out to New South Wales and other parts of Australia and potentially around the world. So check out the website for other locations for next year when we'll go out bird watching to some of these locations. My third story this week is about one of the birds we saw on that trip, and I was so excited when I saw the whiteback swallows. I hadn't seen them for many. You might hear there's some noisy miners calling in the background at the moment. We saw noisy miners on the trip, as well as their inland cousins, the yellow-rumped miners, or yellow-throated as they're called. But the bird I wanted to talk about from the trip was the whiteback swallow. This is a swallow that nests by digging a hole into an embankment, lays its eggs in the hole, and then comes out and raises its chick. We found them probably nesting along a stretch of roadside. But the amazing thing about swallows is that they are a unique group of songbirds. They evolved from the main song group probably about 20 million years ago. And they're a wide group of species that occur all around the world. In fact, swallows have been recorded in the Antarctic. And they have a very long, sleek body shape, long forked tail. They have very wide mouth, very strong jaws, and they specialise in flying through the air, eating insects. And they have a very, very low metabolic rate. They do all of what they do in terms of their aeronautics with using up very little energy. In fact, 50% less than most birds of a similar size. But the white-backed swallow, I think, is probably, and I'll challenge people from around the world because there are swallows in most places, I think our white-backed swallow from inland Australia is probably the most beautiful of all the swallows. It's a really pretty bird, white back, black breast, a line through its brow, very long forked tail, and when you see it weaving across the grasslands and between the trees, it is a very distinctive bird when you see it in inland Australia. And I was so pleased to be able to see some this week on our trip inland. The last story I'd like to bring you this week, and it's the middle of November in Australia at the moment, and right now the young chicks from this year's broods are all starting to emerge. The young magpies, the young wattlebirds, the butcherbirds, all around southern Australia there are chicks leaving their nests with their parents. And what happens, especially in windy weather, and it's a little bit breezy here at the moment, what we have is sometimes the chicks will leave a day or two early than they should, and they don't fly very well. And people with the best of intentions will find these birds on the ground and feel that they need to help them and intervene. Now, sometimes all that's needed is for the bird to be picked up off the ground and popped up into a safe place in a tree, and the parents will be nearby and the parents will take over the task. Sometimes you might have to make sure that, you know, they're safe from foxes and currawongs, etc. Sadly, many of these young birds are picked up and taken away, even though their parents are still around, and taken to wildlife caring places, which is great. The carers will look after them, but then they need to be returned to where the parents are. And often you can return them a day or two later. And there is no problem with that in the sense that the parents will often take the birds back. Parent birds don't react to the smell of humans on the chicks. And sometimes that's a satisfactory way of doing it. But if the birds are kept away from their parents long, it can be very difficult to reintroduce them back and make them wild birds again. So if you do find chicks on the ground at this time of the year, young magpies, young wattlebirds, honey eaters, whatever, always be hesitant to intervene. Check to make sure that the parents aren't actually still around and feeding them and looking after them. And if you feel the bird is in a vulnerable place, just pop it up out of harm's way in a thicket or onto a shrub. The bird will often be able to grip quite well, and the parents are the best place for the chick to be cared for. So this epidemic of kidnapping of birds that occurs at this time of the year doesn't need to be an epidemic. We should just perhaps leave the birds where they are, and hopefully they will have the best chance of survival to grow into adult birds. So that's the end of my wrap this week. Don't forget, if you've got a question that you'd like to ask me, go onto the website to the Ask Me button, press the button, put in your details, tell me your question, and I'll either write back to you or I can perhaps even answer the story as a wrap. So check out the Ask Me spot and look at the other stories that I have on my website. So thanks for listening and happy birding.